This program was first broadcast on Canterbury's access media station, Plains FM, and was made with the assistance of New Zealand On Air.
Good morning, Bliss lovers. Welcome to the Find Your Bliss radio show here on Plains FM. I'm delighted to be in the studio with Jill Genet. Welcome, Jill.
Oh, hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, so good to have you here. Everybody, Jill, I've got an amazing story to tell you about Jill. Jill is the founder of Red Tent Aotearoa and Red Tent Australia. So she's a very vibrant and highly skilled facilitator. I'm delighted to have you in the studio here today, Jill. She's a change maker visionary with over 20 years of experience running women's circles. Hallelujah to that. Strong passion for connecting women to make their dreams come true, and I'm so with you on that one. There's nothing more inspiring, right, than seeing a woman actually step into her full potential.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Jill's actually trained over 100 women from all walks of life and all age groups to run their own businesses using graceful leadership, a training she wrote in 2015. And many of these women have gone on to lead Red Tents under the banner of Red Tent Australia. Now, if you don't know what Red Tent is at the moment, folks, you will find out very shortly. But it's a non-profit community enterprise movement that Jill began in 2013, and she has actually opened and run, essentially overviewed 60 Red Tents to date. She's got a numerology life path number of the spiritual messenger and has taken on the role of gathering the tribe to make the necessary change needed at this time in our evolution. Even reading that makes me feel so much more relaxed.
Makes me feel tired.
Big mission, right? Big mission out there in the world. So she has qualifications in business and project management, counselling, compassionate communication, meditation, mediation, Red Tent facilitation and yogi teaching. And her goal is to educate, awaken and enlighten women to their power, strength and natural gifts. So in her mission to support women in opening and running Red Tents in every neighbourhood all over Australia and now having come home to New Zealand, Jill says the Red Tent movement is a worldwide one and needed now more than ever as women awaken into their purpose and power. She feels it's essential for the growth of our civilization that women have a circle of support around them to grow and strengthen them for our culture and to nurture the future. Again, just reading that and dropping into that feeling of being connected and being held and being safe, which is so important for women to flourish. So in our society today, there's no formal acknowledgement or recognition of a feminine divinity. Yes, it is still thought to be underground alternative movement or somewhat threatening to the mainstream. You know, we're talking about that before, about talking about menstruation in the boardroom, right? How to clear a room. Jill wants to break down the falsehoods and illusions that are too often found in our culture to bring systemic healing into the light. She says the way of doing this by training women in non-violent communication, can't wait to talk to you about that more, and compassionate communication so they'll be able to experience the ripple effect on their families and humanity at large. So Red Tent Australia has been built on the model of sacred commerce where the number of others you help succeed measures your success. Yeah, it's all about the impact that you're making. We're asking for help and being open to receiving are imperative. We're shaming and blaming are not acceptable forms of communication, and we're providing a holistic approach for women to become as the main focus. So welcome home, Jill, because you came back to Christchurch earlier this year, was it?
Yeah, at the beginning of January, as a lot of people are coming home now.
Yes.
And it was so exciting at the beginning, and had this amazing job, great big huge vision.
Yeah.
And Red Tent really wasn't on the cards for Aotearoa. Yeah, it was sort of something that maybe I would do. And had this great job, and then COVID. And so, lost my job and really started to miss my circle of women. I think I had probably taken it for granted a little bit because it had been in my life for so long. And when you've got that constant, not just support, but inspiration, you know, when one woman is doing the thing, it just gives all the other women permission to do the thing too.
Yes.
And I still obviously could Zoom with them and FaceTime and everything, but it was just sitting in person and just actually talking at length, because when you're on Zoom or whatever, you just go over the highlights
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
The A roll, not the B roll.
That's exactly true, because when you've got time, that's when you can take off the mask and go, okay, really, let's talk about what is really going on here.
Yes. So for people who are listening and they have got no idea, tell us what red tent is and its origins.
Yeah.
You know, even some of the historical history is quite fascinating about what it actually is.
Yeah, so it really stemmed from a book that was written in about 1997-98 called The Red Tent by Anita Diamond. And that was a story that it was sort of like, what would life be like if we had this place to go to as women? And it was set in biblical times, so it's sort of centred around a woman called Dinah, and she was raised by many mothers, and it was, of course, communal living, and once a month the women all went into the red tent, which was animal skins, and you could substitute that for a cave, and they bled together, and the younger women would help by making the food, and the women who were no longer bleeding would share stories, share everything, and everybody learnt, and at that time, and because there was no birth control, fluorescent lights or microwaved food, they would have been bleeding at the same time.
Yes.
So on the new moon. Yeah. And so this is the time that they went in, and they relaxed, and they took care of themselves, and they learnt all of the things that would make them better, survival. And better mums, and how to birth babies, and how to blend spices, and how to preserve food, and all of the stuff.
Sharing the wisdom,
and the wisdom and the spiritual knowledge. And so the story, I remember reading it when it first came out, and it just stuck with me. It was one of those ones that, I picked it up on a Friday and didn't put it down until the Sunday night, and just read the whole thing in one sitting. And so it was always in my mind, and I knew about the Red Tent movement but hadn't really touched it because I lived in America for all that time in my 20s and 30s. And then I moved to Australia, and I didn't know anyone. And I knew I had had 3 babies in America, and it was a very sort of lonely place for me to be with no family, and the wheels kind of fell off the bus. 3 babies in 4 years, and and not family, no family. So when I got to Australia, and I knew I was going to have another baby, and I knew that had a possibility of happening again, and I just couldn't let it. With this new family, I needed to get off my couch and go and create what I needed. And I say that in order to feel belonging, I had to become what I longed for, which was connection. And I didn't want drama. I didn't want superficial twaddle. I wanted
Define twaddle. No, you don't have to. That's fine. That's hilarious.
I wanted real
depth.
I wanted, I wanted to be able to say the things that were on my heart, and not have that must be, no judgment around it. And so my daughter was at school with a little girl, and her mum, the little girl's mum, said, "Do you want to come to this red tent?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And something was sparked. And it was an event by a woman called Jane Hardwick Collins, who has got a huge body of amazing work. And they were doing a promotion of a documentary called Stories from the Red Tent, Things We Don't Talk About, which was a documentary made by an American filmmaker. And so we went along to this red tent, and we spent the whole afternoon just having great conversations and doing some craft and eating some food and drinking lots of cups of tea. And then we watched the documentary. And I was heavily pregnant, and I thought, I need this in my life. Come on, somebody.
Yeah.
Let's start this.
You mean yourself.
Turns out it was me. And so I did, just literally that same week, coincidentally, Tanishka, who is the Moon Woman on Facebook, she put up a Red Tent Facilitation training course online. So I did that and started planning the opening for Red Tent. And it was Bayside Red Tent. I was in Brisbane. And so that was... so I was pregnant, and he was 2 weeks old. My little boy was 2 weeks old at the first circle. Yeah,
you talked about how you had him against your chest, and people didn't even realise he was there.
I had people come up, 7 years later, and I was talking about having Rowan at the first circle, and they said, "Did you really? I don't remember a baby." And he was asleep the whole time, just sort of in a sling. And I think, what was I thinking, having a 2-week-old baby running this circle? And I remember sitting there at my first circle looking around, and there was 25, 27 women And I'm thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing. They're expecting me to say some words right now.
Yeah.
And so, I just sort of opened myself up and said, let's let this be. Please say the words that need to be heard.
Yeah, there's so many questions I want to ask you because, like the question that actually comes up, even though it's kind of jumping around a little bit, so you have to bear with us today, folks. What have you learnt about holding space? Like facilitation, like as a, and that's why it's so lovely to connect with somebody like you who knows what it's like to facilitate people who are, we were just talking about this before, right? People who are in grief or they have wounding and they're projecting wounding.
Yeah.
Right? And holding space for people to heal. Because I imagine your first experience of that compared to where you're at now is completely different.
Absolutely different. Well, the thing that I've learned is don't be afraid. There is nothing that anybody can say or has been through that you can't hold space for them.
Yeah.
I've heard stories from, people who have been in war zones, people who have had, multiple gang rapes, people who have lost everything, their houses have burnt down and they've lost everything. There's nobody that has been through anything that you can't be there for them. Please don't run away. Please don't run away from grief or loss or tragedy or anything that's happened in people's lives. We need to be there for people.
Yeah.
And we don't need to say any magic words.
Yes.
And fix them.
Yes, right, because there's that compulsion, isn't it, which is quite a masculine thing to do, right? Like, let me solve that problem for you.
The worst phrase, I think, in the human language is, what you need to do is...
Oh, yeah. No.
Because it never goes well.
Yeah, well, also too, I think this is what we fundamentally know as humans, that we are the ones who heal ourselves. So people can offer you guidance and support, but really a holding space is helping people to learn how to heal themselves.
And also, I think when you're holding space, not sitting directly across from someone is helpful, unless you are in a circle, because quite often you'll find that the person who is sitting across from you is sharing your story, and you'll think, hang on a minute, I've never met this person before, but how do they know how I've been feeling or what I've been going through?
Yeah, there's some amazing synchronicities that happen in circle, like when people sit down next to each other, right, and they just have amazing connection. Yeah,
I think at the beginning I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to say those words that would fix people and to be the person that could be the helper. Yeah. And it really was exhausting. Yeah. So boundaries are so important. And also asking people or saying what you want. So sometimes people will feel like, oh, what's expected of me? I have to share my life story here.
Right, yeah.
No. That's not required at all. Yeah. Sometimes just being in the space is enough, and we're not changing anything or fixing anything or healing anything. What we're doing, it's almost like the steam in a kettle. We're allowing it to evaporate or dissipate or whatever happens when we share our story. I've just seen it thousands of times.
And exactly. People come to rest, don't they, really?
Yeah, it's not the exception, it's the rule, that there's something that is magical that happens when women sit in circle together. Yeah. And they can really share what's going on for them. And we can have, the worst day and come in and share about it. And then when we leave, we're driving home and we're like, man, I was so upset on the way here. And have the best night's sleep because you've managed to get into that rest, that relaxed state. Cool. Which is similar to meditation as well. Yeah.
And kind of like being a living meditation. So tell me, for people, again, who don't know, what happens at a red tent? Like if somebody comes along to an event, because now you're starting to run them in New Zealand, which is amazing. And, there's so much we could talk about too, about how you even got to 60 red tents all across Australia and the work that was involved and also the assimilations in your own energy and awareness and stepping into business, etc. But what can somebody expect if they come to a red tent? Like if they're interested about it, if they want to know more, like what would be something that you would tell them and share with them?
Well, I think we follow a fairly loose format. So I say if you've been to one red tent, you've been to one red tent. But at the same time, and there are many, many red tents. So the way that I'm running Red Tent Aotearoa and the way that Red Tent Australia was run, I feel safe in ritual and ceremony, and those words have a lot of different meanings to different people, but for me it's sort of almost following a bit of a plan that we create a space. I believe that everything has a beginning, a middle and an end, like parentheses. If you're reading a sentence and it doesn't have the end bracket, then you think, hang on a minute, that's not right. So I love to start with a bit of, we stand outside and we take our shoes off. And I just set an intention. And the reason I do that is because our time is so precious and I don't want it frittered away.
Yes.
And so I ask the women who are present to set their own intention, and it may be something really simple like, I'm not going to run away, or I'm not going to disassociate, or I'm going to be present.
Yes.
And I sort of ask people to think about why they came. And we might do a bit of an anointing with some rose oil, and we do that on the third eye. Everything in the red tent setting is an invitation. There's no obligation. If people think, this is weird, or I don't know what these people are doing, then that's absolutely fine. We might do a smoke clearing. We have volunteers usually will bring herbs that they've grown in their garden. And then we have a theme. So the first red tent that we opened, which was last month, we call it Find Your Wolf Pack or Find Your Tribe. And it is an opportunity for the women to share what they want. Because I really do believe, and I know that you believe this as well, that everybody has that special magic or unique talent or gift, and even if they can't see it, that's why we help them to find what it is that they really love, and that eventually, even if it's not for the first 2, 3, 5 years, there might be a time that they can step in and say, okay, today I'm going to teach macrame, mosaics, walking meditation, whatever, singing. So the theme sort of, after we do a bit of a meditation, we have lots of cups of tea, we introduce a woman who is from within the circle to share her gift. And so this month in December, we have a lady called Heidi Jones coming in, and she's going to be sharing the power of positive touch. So she's a massage therapist. Because 2020 has been very lacking in touch.
Yes, absolutely. We've had to, learn how to deal with life without it, right? And we crave it as humans, right? Wow.
And so we're doing hand and foot massages, and we're going to be soaking our feet in some magnesium baths, which is just good all round. Lots of cups of tea, lots of conversation, and then we have a sharing circle, which again is an invitation. And so we usually pose a bit of a question or a theme for the sharing circle. This month we are saying, how have your views changed in 2020?
Sure.
So it's a bit of a recap, thinking back to this time last year, what were you thinking and doing?
And hasn't that changed dramatically, right?
So it's quite open.
Yes. Yeah. But it also has structure though, right? Because obviously having attended the first one, which was absolutely magical, and I've gone to a lot of events, and I must admit you're absolutely on point in terms of there being a certain type of magic. I'm not sure I've ever been to an event before where I felt probably so relaxed and so safe and so rested. Because often, I think we feel like when we go to something, we need to kind of perform or we need to contribute
and pay attention and take notes.
Rather than actually receiving, which of course is the divine feminine. So let's unpack this a little bit more, because this is super juicy stuff, right? In regards to your experiences of activating divine feminine energy within you, and how important this is for women, and how we can often be, the first thing that comes up for me, of course, is kind of like witch wound energy from days gone by, from the ancients, from having to deal with the patriarchy, and how women have been disconnected from themselves, their own power, and of course their own sexuality. Because that's way too powerful, so we need to take it
generations of people who have not even been in their body.
Yes, right. Yes.
And not touched themselves and not known their own anatomy.
Yes, and how...
And they've let doctors be the authority on them.
Yes.
Sometimes doctors they haven't even met before.
Yes, right. Or sometimes doctors who don't have a vagina, right?
Yeah, right.
So... discovering what it is to kind of reclaim that, because one of the books I think you had there was Womb Awakening.
Yeah, fabulous book. And so now this is all still for some people. Hasn't reached mainstream yet, but it's so much further along the path than when I sort of started this. And I started running women's circles in America, and it was based around it was basically a play group. And, all the women would compare how far along their kids are. Yours isn't rolling over yet. Oh, yours isn't on solid foods yet. And I just always felt like I was swimming upstream because I had been around kids a lot, and I wasn't a nervous mother. And, I breastfed for a long time, and I used cloth diapers, nappies, and I grew my own vegetables. So I was weird.
Right. That's funny.
And so having experience with the dynamics of women, and just feeling like a freak for that time, and then coming to Australia and not feeling quite so freaky because I was around women who were very much like me, but still some of the things that I had learnt, and I really love to read, and so I'd read so many books about womb wisdom, and all about the menstrual magic that we have access to, and some people, I remember one of the talks, so I give a talk, I'm a menstrual educator, and I give a talk called Go With The Flow.
Yeah.
And it's about harnessing the power of your cycle.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, people think this human existence, we don't have a map, or we don't have a, how do you, be an adult? There is a map. There is a way to learn how to win at life, and it is by studying your cycle, and it's all there. And we just are so oblivious sometimes. There are a lot of people doing work around this, and it's so great. But I think even just the 7-8 years ago that I started Red Tent Australia, Bayside Red Tent, people have come a long way. Women are learning so much.
Or even like with the moon.
Yes.
And understanding.
It feels easier now. Like I don't have to explain things or have people go, oh my God, that's disgusting. Or I remember I gave a talk once in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, and there was a woman, she said, I've been a midwife for 15 years and I had no idea about these things.
Wow.
She said, you are blowing my mind right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And just alternative menstrual products, not the tampons and pads that we have been raised with.
And stuff.
And different practices and ways that we can honour ourselves and give back to the earth. These things now are becoming a little bit more
socially acceptable.
Thank you, exactly. Yeah, so it doesn't feel as hard anymore.
Yeah. I think also too, because it's so prevalent, we were just talking about that this morning too, about health and about how we can push ourselves as women. We end up with adrenal fatigue, and we end up feeling depleted, and we end up, overgiving.
Anemic.
Yeah, I've just discovered that, folks, right? That for myself personally, I'm actually anemic.
Yeah.
So, there's an imbalance there.
Yeah.
And, it feels like depletion. So what do you do when you feel depleted? You have to learn to fill your own cup.
I think that, the worst insult, growing up for me, the worst insult that somebody could say was, you're lazy.
Wow.
And to be a good woman meant that you were selfless.
Yes.
If you were selfish, then that was bad.
So we have this guilt, this stigma.
Overfunction. Yeah, make sure that everybody's okay. And, I've got a family of 6 kids. So it was
easy to fall into.
Every day just striving in to-do lists. I do love a to-do list though.
Yeah.
But making sure, and I remember beating myself up about if I didn't achieve the things on my to-do list. And that shift, getting back to your question, that shift has been, I think, the best for me to honour myself and allowing and trusting that even if I do nothing, nothing is left undone.
Yes. I following Regina, Mama G, in her book, Posse, the reclamation, and how she says, you can have a to-do list, but just make sure your orgasm's on the top of it.
Absolutely. Well, and this is the thing, taking back our power in terms of, the whole lie back and think of England thing. I feel so sorry, not just for the women in those relationships and generations of them, but for the men. Because a woman who is awakened in her sexual energy...
Yeah.
Well, and first of all, it's not just her that's benefiting. The ripple effects of that, and the ripple effects of being partnered with somebody who is really walking in her power, everybody around her will then benefit as well. The ripple effects, and I'm not saying coming to the Red Tent will improve your orgasms, but it might.
Well, it will help you to relax, which I think is a big part of the process.
Yeah, and we talk about everything, within, of course, people feeling safe, and there's no disrobing or sexual practice or anything like that. But we do talk about the things, and it's amazing. This is another type of thing that's incredibly healing, when somebody says something that their heart is pounding, and they feel like they are the only one that feels this way. And then we do a silly little thing in the Red Tent which we call sparkle fingers or twinkle fingers. And so when somebody is sharing something, rather than go, "Oh my God, me too," we just subtly wiggle our fingers and help them out of the corner of their eyes to see there's other people that are feeling this way. And then you just
it is
alone.
Deeply supportive. So again, for people who are listening and they're like, I don't know what divine feminine energy is all about, what would you say to them? Like, again, how can the Red Tent help you connect to that?
Well, I think the patriarchy and the energy that we've been living in, it's actually relatively young.
Yeah, it is, right? I was thinking about that the other day, watching a documentary about the 1960s, going, I can't believe the woman's revolution essentially was just in the 60s.
Well, we talk about the waves of feminism, and feminism's got such a bad rap as well. But we talk about the first wave of feminism and New Zealand was leading the way with Kate Shepherd and Emily Pankhurst, and it was very violent, and women didn't just lose their families, they lost their lives standing up and trying to actually just be heard, just be seen. And so that was the first wave. And then the second wave was in the 60s, and it was free love, which women were still giving themselves away.
Yeah.
They were.
Yeah.
And then I think about the 80s, with the big shoulder pads.
I love those earrings.
And I remember going to job interviews and had Velcro shoulder. Did you have Velcro?
Oh, yes, yeah, totally.
3
and
sizes.
A big red power suit.
Yes. And just trying to, and there's lots of movies about that, and actually just trying to take over and push the men aside, and that didn't work either.
Yeah, we're going into masculine energy, right? So it's like when you have two masculine energies together, it just becomes a competition.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so then of course we become adversaries as opposed to like working
and it
together.
Didn't benefit anyone.
Yeah.
And then what we call the fourth wave of feminism has been started, I guess in the last 10 years. And it's a beautiful, flowing, gentle movement. It's kind of quiet, but it's what we call fierce gentle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so there's some really strong women leading this movement, and they are just shining lights.
Yeah.
And it's about knowing that you have the power and that you don't actually have to take it from anyone.
Yes.
And that you are enough and you're worthy, and that being supported by other women is actually the key to your success, which is, I sound so simple. And having lived that way, it's amazing. But whenever there's conflict or competition or...
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, and I have probably come across, it's hard to keep walking in that direction when you do feel scared or threatened, or somebody isn't in that same mindset. So the nonviolent communication, which when I started to learn this, I just thought, this is the key. Everybody needs to learn this. And it is the most amazing way to communicate. But if you're the only person in the room that's doing it can feel a wee bit futile. And it, especially for women who have either been in the corporate sector or who have been through a lot of trauma and have, unhealed wounds with their mums or any strong women in their lives, and they come in to the Red Tent and they will find fault and they will criticise, and it's not available to them to own their stuff. And so the blaming and the shaming will start to come, and they feel like it's there's not enough You know, like empathy and compassion and support is a pizza. And if you have a piece and then everybody else has a piece, there's no pizza for me.
Right.
And that's not how it works at all.
Yeah.
So holding instead of retaliating. I'm not a fighter. I will never get up in your face. That's not the way I react. I'll never go into a social media Facebook war with people. I will hold space and just say, okay.
Yeah, be the observer.
Yeah.
So also too, what I want to underline there too about feminism, because my approach, of course, is that we're all connected, we're all one, and of course God is beyond gender. So God, goddess. So, just underlining the fact that when women do step into their power, it's amazing for male-female relationships and how that's our ultimate goal is to be in unity. So, and also too, because even these days, I mean, I don't know, I'm grateful that I'm a woman.
Yeah.
I think for men especially, it's been confronting time. And again, we do need to confront those old patterns of ignorance.
And the older we are, the more unlearning we have. And it pops up, just the same, the norms and the things that we have been trained by our parents and grandparents and society at large, and catching ourselves when we have this outdated thinking and realising there is another way, and it's the same with cultural appropriation. There's been, especially in the women's movement, there's been so much just learning from other cultures and thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to do that too.
Yes.
And it's not okay.
Yes, right.
When I lived in America, as I said, for my 20s and 30s, and when I was pregnant with my daughter Grace, I was suffering bad morning sickness, and so I go to a health food store, and there was a lady there. She was Native American, she was Iroquois, and her name was Grace. And so I was looking for something to help me with my morning sickness, and she said, you won't find it in here. And so she would take me outside. She had a farm, so it was her health food store, but I didn't know that she was the owner. She was just this little old lady that I made friends with.
Yeah.
And so we would go on weed walks.
Wow.
And I would learn all about the plants and the medicine and things like that. So she taught me a ton. Sadly, she passed away, but her teachings are not mine. I'm not Native American. So when I first wrote the training for Red Tent Australia, I included quite a few of the things. And then I realised, I can't do that. I can't ask her permission either. So we've rewritten the training and made it more available and more responsible and more respectable. And I encourage women who are using outdated things like that aren't theirs to do that the same as well, with respect.
Yeah, and well, again, it's all about it's the awareness, isn't it? And understanding and following people's wishes, especially in terms of sharing wisdom. Yeah, because we're, I've felt that conflict before myself, because there's not really actually a huge amount of new or original thought
there's
on the
nothing
planet,
new under the
right?
sun.
So, and also too, how we approach source energy is unique to us and our interpretation and our relationship, of course, but sharing the wisdom, because often we've learnt that wisdom from other people.
And sometimes we forget where we heard it.
Yes.
But giving credit where credit's due is always, I think, and I love to do that. When I share something, a process or, a belief or anything, and if I can say this is from my teacher Tanishka, or this is from Jane Hardwick Collins, or this is from Brene Brown, or this is from Byron Katie, I feel like I'm honouring them.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's just a little way of giving back, that I'm so grateful for all the women that have gone before me and have taught me so much. I'm just the delivery person, this is... and yes, we organise things in our own words and stuff, but it's all come from somewhere else. And if we can acknowledge that I think is extremely powerful, because it actually widens our circle.
So let's loop back, because you've done a lot of stuff, right? You've done project management, you've done counselling, and you've obviously utilised all these skills. Maybe tell us a little bit about the journey of Red Tent Australia growing like that, because that's pretty extraordinary in terms of service as well, right?
when you're in the middle of it, head down, bum up, you're sort of just doing day-to-day doing. And then when I stepped back, and it wasn't until I think I was interviewed for a magazine or something, for Women's Day, not Women's Day, International Women's Day, not the magazine. And I went, oh my goodness. And the person, I remember, read out a bio that had been written, put together, and I thought, holy crap, that's me. I think at the beginning I had no idea what I was doing, and so I realised I very quickly had to learn. So I started studying. I became a counsellor, and from then, and so I'm a holistic counsellor, so we go to the root cause, and so we can work with family structures. We can we walk in both worlds about things that are presenting today and things that may be generational or energetic. And then I really focused on non-violent communication, because that just having a house full of teenagers really seemed, and they learned it so much more quick than I did.
Awesome.
And within the red tent structure, because we could bring in experts in the field and do these amazing workshops, so then the families could learn it too. And I remember my kids picking up non-violent communication, and I'd be sort of freaking out. We'd be late for something or stressing out, and Grace would go, "Mum, it sounds like you're feeling really tired. Would you like a cup of tea?" Or, "It sounds like you're feeling really stressed. Can I help you carry your bag?"
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. It was about being received, isn't it? Acknowledged and received.
And it's not about what you need to do is. So, so then just studying so much, and it was probably about a year of having a problem, which I guess is a good problem, but we had waiting lists of women wanting to come to Red Tent, and they were driving an hour, 2 hours to come to this circle. And it wasn't rocket science, it was just sitting and being seen and heard and actually nurtured. And so the people who were the locals, they couldn't come because there was a waiting list. And I remember my midwife called and said, "Jill, can I come to Red Tent tonight?" And I said, "I'm so sorry, dear, I've got a waiting list of 12 people." And we were sitting like shoulder to shoulder, so it was like crowd control. And then the magic sort of got lost a little bit then too. So there was a woman that always sat next to me on my left side, and her name was Karen. And she said to me, "You need to train people and start doing this." And I said, "Me? No, you do. I don't know anything." She said, "Well, I can help you set it up as a non-profit, and we can, open more branches." So I said yes. I had no idea what I was saying yes to, but I said yes. So we wrote the policies, the procedures, the constitution. We got it set up as a non-profit. We got a board of executive directors.
Wow.
And we started training. So the first training, we had about 12 women come, and God, it was good.
Yeah.
So good. 4 days of total bliss, of practicing these different methods, and really listening to each other, and doing a lot of I knew straight away how important gathering data was, and asking people the effects. So it wasn't just me going, "Oh, this is really great." And so then we had people applying to come to the training, a year in advance, because we kept everything very low cost. And we tried to apply for grants and funding, which is really hard. And the whole thing ran with a big team of volunteers, and is still going. And so we run the trainings in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. Of course, COVID has put a stop to that for the time being, twice a year, and they're always very well attended. The interview process is somewhat unorthodox, because we chart the cycles of the women. We do their numerology and their astrology, and we figure out,
to be a facilitator.
Because sometimes when people say, "I really love this, I want to be a part of it," what they mean is, can I volunteer to, help set it up? Being a facilitator is a big responsibility, and it's a lot of work, and it's not for everyone. And, we've trained over 100 women, but we probably only have, at the moment, maybe 50 facilitators. And some red tents will go for a while and then they'll go, oh, I've still got some work to do. I'm just going to put the pause button on this. And, you know, because what happens when you sit in circle is all of your insecurities, unhealed wounds, and all of the demons will come rushing to meet you. Same as when you start a new relationship or a new job.
Yeah, it's a container for growth, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and growth only comes from contrast. So what does it take to embrace it wholeheartedly and have the courage to do that?
And just stay in it.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to run
Only
away.
way out is through, right? Yeah, and that's a skill set too, as a facilitator, to kind of go, I can see what's coming up for you, but stay with, right? Stay present.
And the biggest thing, you know, for the red tent facilitators is to ask for help, because it's been, you know, for women, because this is like their own business. When they start a red tent in their town, they're fully responsible. We are there for their, you know, social media, logo, website, policies, procedures, all that sort of stuff, insurance. But it's their business, and they run it and find us guest speakers and help people to find their way to the red tent. And there's a lot in that as well, just to be able to find a space to hold the circle, decorate it beautifully, make sure that you are on time. Yes,
creating an atmosphere, all of that, for sure. Amazing food. It was incredible. Last time we're all asking you for your hummus recipe. It was incredible. But again, you know, that space where it's safe to come. So is that your intention for New Zealand, or is it kind of one put in front of each other at the moment? It's kind of like,
give me a year.
I
think there's so much shifting sands at the moment in my life, you know, just with where I'm living. And as I said, I lost my job at the beginning of COVID, so figuring out how it all goes together, that's something that,
Cool.
So
I keep on hearing Queenstown, so that must be on the cards some way, somehow.
I've been contacted by a lot of women in the North Island, and as I said, there are lots of other red tents running, so please don't wait for me if you're listening to this.
Yeah, sure.
And there is definitely safety in numbers, you know, and having that support circle of other women, and that's what I encourage the red tent facilitators from Australia to do. They just all talk to each other and share and support, and they go to each other's circles, and it's like your own personal cheer squad.
Yes, which women really need, right?
Yeah, and to see, whenever we have an opening, all of the other facilitators, and we'll go and spend the night at people's house, and everybody drives to the opening of the red tent, and just the best times ever. I remember, you know, Noosa, Mullaney, up in the Sunshine Coast, because for us from Brisbane it was quite a drive, and we'd all just pile in the cars and drive up to these openings and spend the weekend there.
Magic.
It was so fun.
Yeah. Because there's nothing worse than you know, woundedness and sisterhood too, right? Like, because I think, you know, like doing energy work, of course, it's all about relationships, and for a lot of women, they feel deeply wounded in friendships.
Absolutely.
Right?
And it's very hard to trust again.
Yes, and so coming to something like that can be initially really intimidating, but so transformative in terms of getting the support that you're looking for.
And I can guarantee that when you come to Red Tent, you will find people who remind you of those people who wounded you. It'll be just, you know, maybe that's something that they're wearing, or something that they say, or a mannerism, and that, and we talk about, you know, your triggers being your treasure.
Yes, right.
One of these things is not like the other. Remember from Sesame Street? So when you run into someone, and it, you know, happens everywhere, not just in the Red Tent, but when you run into somebody that reminds you of someone, go with that. Figure that out.
Take some time. The universe is always gifting to you, although sometimes the wrapping paper, we can perceive it as being a bit shitty. Oops, excuse me, clear and transmute. But it's true, right? Like, there's actually a gift in here, so let's open up the cover and see what the gift is.
And if
take
you
the
can't
gift.
see it, ask for help. Sometimes just sharing your story, because then other people, they might not be able to say what you need to do is, but they might be able to say, and I love to use I use story a lot when I'm sharing ideas. Allegory, I think it's called, you know, and I kind of wind and I weave when I'm telling a story, and introduce elements that may be from my life, but also maybe from, you know, history or fairy tales or whatever.
Yes,
because everything
so
has been done before. There's nothing new, and to try and imagine what someone else is feeling, or to see what their wounds are and compare, that's not very kind. It's not giving them the space that they need. But to say what's happening for me, and maybe it is relatable to them, because these wounds that we have, they are deep and they are real, and they happen again and again and again throughout history, since time began.
And you know, there's the personal wounding that you have in your own family experience, and then there's the wounding you have kind of on more of an external level, and then there's the wounding that we have for women as a society.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's
so
lots of
many
different levels.
Yeah. And the family wound, I think, is obviously the nearest and the deepest. And it's the one that is there.
Soul tribe, gotta love that. High five all your family members.
Absolutely. I ran away. So I left when I was 18. So I grew up here in Christchurch, and I left when I was 18 and just ran away. Couldn't cope. And it was only, you know, my dad passed away just recently as well. And so after he died, I thought maybe it's time to come home. And Red Tent, you know, obviously was such a big part of my life that it was necessary for it to happen here, even if I didn't want to admit it to begin with. But the reason is because of that sisterhood wounding as well. And to be able to then come back as a completely different healing, and I hate those words, healed and healing. I replace it with free and freedom, freeing. No longer having those things hanging over my head. I can approach it so differently, and I can come back and be a good sister.
Yes.
And good daughter.
And also too, I think one of the biggest things that I see in my work for women especially is I just have to carry my own load. I don't have to carry anything for anyone else, even my kids. Right? Like they're connected to infinite wisdom through their own intuition. So I can facilitate them to figure this stuff out for themselves.
Absolutely.
And I need to do that with my mum, my sisters, my brothers, my cousins, my extended family, my partner, you know, everybody in your life. People want that too. They want to be autonomous. They want to know that they can figure stuff out.
We don't have to fix anyone.
No, and we don't have to go into other people's lanes. And how you would have seen this all the time, right? Like burden bearing or people pleasing or codependency, and it's
good
just
girl.
like yes.
And I even used the word good a couple of times just before, and I thought,
I know, good, right? You've been aware
bad,
of it.
Yeah.
Good, bad, right, wrong, pass, fail. Yes,
no.
yes.
There is no such thing, and that's exactly, and we were just talking about this before we came on air, about not trying to fix anybody else.
Yes.
And that's so key with Red Tent as well. And it's not therapy. Making that really, really clear at the beginning, that you are not coming here for therapy. You know, I am a counsellor. If they need help, I'm there. Not in the Red Tent setting, no.
Yeah, that's really powerful though, because really what it's about is an activation of energy, of knowing that instead of feeling like you have to add something more, you can actually lean back, which is very feminine, right, in terms of receiving.
It's so simple, but we don't do it enough.
Yeah, exactly. And also too, like the rushing woman time that to-do list, going into that push, drive, grind energy, and it's like, what does it take to step back into flow? I did a radio show about that last week, right, about doing...
Yeah, that was so great. I did
doing it from the feminine, and how you, like, as a woman, you just get to a point where you're like, I can't do that anymore. It's just, it feels abusive, traumatic even.
The epidemic of burnout and undiagnosed PTSD, especially here in Christchurch. And
yeah, good point.
Yeah, there's no there's no coincidence that Red Tent Aotearoa is starting in Christchurch. And I remember before I launched it, speaking to many women and asking, what do you need? Because I don't want to come in here and presume that I'm the person that's going to come in here and give you what you need. I have no idea. I wasn't here. I've been away for 28 years.
And it's been an amazing container for spiritual growth, Christchurch. You know, there's been some pretty intense stuff that's happened, not just the earthquakes, obviously, with the shootings, etc. So we've and that's a lot to assimilate in the central nervous system for a physical body.
Christchurch is the epicentre, the ecosystem of change that is happening.
Totally.
And I really think
I recognised that quite a few years ago.
The ripple effect that's happening from Christchurch. People all over the world talk about Christchurch.
Yeah.
We don't, we can't fly under the radar anymore. People are watching, the whole world is watching Christchurch rebuild.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, come on Christchurch, you can do it, but also, come on Christchurch, what are you doing so we can do the same thing here?
Yes. I set that intention in my tribe a long time ago. What would it take for Christchurch to really be, the spiritual centre of New Zealand, let alone, wouldn't be so audacious to say the rest of the world, but, to be a forerunner in terms of spiritual
sending out
development.
those ripple effects,
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
And that I just, the energy that it keeps on coming back to for me, and even talking to you about it is so lovely, because I can really feel that energy of just deep relaxation, not having to go out of your centre, not having, going into something, performance, which feels like pressure, which feels like judgment, which feels like, because a lot of people do that, especially in terms of being visible. They're oh my God, I'm going to be seen, so therefore I'm going to be attacked.
Well, and so they put up a barrier instead of a boundary. And I think it's exhausting. And it's, for me, watching people who are trying to push themselves out there and be the spiritual guru. There's no authenticity either. And
I've been attacked for that kind of before. Is your life on the outside the same as your life on the inside?
You are the real deal.
Well, I'm pretty, I tell people about all the messes I've made.
You, Rebecca. So when I first got here, I put on the radio and was driving to work, and you came on the radio.
Oh, no way.
And I didn't know your name. I didn't even know what radio station I was listening to. It was literally the first time driving this car. And I was going to work, and then it happened again. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's talking to me. The things that you were sharing was so in alignment with what I was going through in my life.
So funny.
And it was just, I have to find this lady. And I Googled the most random things. And then you were here in Christchurch.
Wow. Yeah.
And you're a neighbour of a friend of mine. And it was like, come on.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
I love that. And again, thanks to Source Energy for making all those connections, because again, to be, that's how it works. I've heard that a lot, people saying I turned the radio dial and it was like you were talking to me, having a private conversation basically. So that to me again is about speaking what's in your heart.
Yeah.
And that's the truth of the matter. That's just what it is.
And I say that a lot, and I talk about core values, and there's a really great exercise by Brene Brown, and I encourage anybody that's listening to this to do this, not just with their family but workplace relationships. If you know what somebody's core values are, and there's only two, it's a tricky one because you get all these millions, and there's lots of core values, but you have to reduce it down to two. So mine is authenticity and belonging. And if I let you know that, then you know which filter I'm looking at the world through. Yeah. And if I know what yours are, and I can't presume to guess because I don't know, what you've been through. Yeah. And it's so much easier to communicate with people or understand where they're coming from if you know their core values.
Yeah, totally. I would have to say, because I talk about this a lot with the Academy, right? Freedom, pleasure and abundance, the triangle. But if I had to choose myself personally, it's probably freedom and connection. Which
that's delicious. That's wonderful. And so I think in pictures. And so for me, freedom and connection is skipping along a beach, but with lots of people holding hands. And it's almost like a Coca-Cola ad.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Coca-Cola. Yeah. Funny. But because again, if you want to experience joy, you want to experience it with other people, right? You can't really do it by yourself.
And that's why 2020 has been so crap.
Yeah. So tell us quickly, we've only got about a minute remaining actually. So tell us how people can get hold of you.
Yeah, okay. So email redtent@gmail.com.
Okay, cool.
I'm Jill Genet, Genet. So you can find me on Facebook and Instagram. We've got Red Tent Aotearoa on Instagram as well. We don't have a website yet, but we're on Facebook.
Yeah.
And
is it just Red Tent Aotearoa on Facebook?
Yeah. So the page was Infinite Grace Healing. That's the name of my counselling business. But if you put Red Tent Aotearoa, and there probably are other red tents operating as well. So if you can't get to one in Christchurch, please find your local red tent. We're just meeting once a month on a Sunday, and it's from 3 till 6 p.m. at the Craycroft Guiding Centre.
And the next one
is the 13th of December from 3 till 6 p.m. And then I've got them scheduled for every month for next year. And if the need does, grow, which it looks like it is, we'll do 2 a month. We'll do a full moon, which will be more sort of fun and movement and dancing and singing and things. And then new moon is more sort of introspective, doing the work and going within.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So my last question is, if there was a billboard and you had a sentence to put on it to say to the world, what would it be?
You're invited. You belong. You matter.
Yeah.
And it's time.
Yeah, you belong. That really resonates too, right? I think a lot of people want to know what home is.
Connect, create, community is our tagline. And relax, sister, we've got your back.
Yeah. And you need that in order to, like you said, to move into more success. Thank you so much for being here. It has been such a privilege and a pleasure to talk with you and just to exchange energy, which I know has been very soothing for my soul, so I'm sure it has been for all the listeners as well.
Yay.
So I'm sending everybody so much love, and take good care of yourselves, folks. Until next time, we'll see you here again on the Find Your Bliss show. Bye for now.